Hello, all friends and friends yet to be made. Welcome back to Dead Sea's Top 200 Anime List. We don't need much introduction this time around, let's just get right back into it. What? Did you think just because we were out of the bottom 10 that we were free from the trash fires? Of course not. We have school days to talk about, silly. And this is an odd show to discuss because it's very unremarkable for the first 75, 80% of its runtime. Honestly, I don't know how people made it through school days without knowing the ending because I know that's the only reason I was watching it. I mean, we're in the presence of royalty here. This is one of the most notorious endings in the whole genre of anime, to the point that I cannot describe this show's positive and negative traits without spoiling the ending. So this is a bargain bin romance plotline. Our MC, Makoto, is a hopeless romantic who has fallen for lovely classmate Kotonoha. Makoto's friend Sakai finds out and, despite her own hidden feelings for Makoto, decides to help them get together, which they do, and it's a happy ending. Except for the fact that the show isn't even halfway over. What follows is a descent into madness. Makoto realizes he doesn't actually know if he likes Kotonoha genuinely or if it's just a teen lust thing. So, in order to learn more about his feelings toward women, he sleeps with Sakai. And then, promptly after that, every other girl in the show. Sakai feels used, Kotonoha feels abandoned, and Makoto feels nothing because he's revealed to be an insensitive sociopath. What this culminates in is one of the greatest revenge moments in anime history. And then, Kotonoha learns about what just happened and confronts Sakai because despite being used and neglected by Makoto for his own gain, she reveals herself to be a love-crazy yandere and kills Sakai! The show ends with her sailing off on a boat, hugging tightly to Makoto's severed head. For years, this ending was mocked and belittled as an abomination, as something people joked about because no way could things turn out that extreme at the drop of a hat. But I think we as a society have come far enough to recognize that this ending is genius. Nobody would remember school days if it didn't end the way it did. But we still have people talking about it to this day because of that ending. The show is still bad, and the ending is bananas, but something has to be said for how impactful this was for the medium. A plot twist no one predicted that redeemed an otherwise nothing show to make it one of the most discussed pieces of fiction from Japan in the last 20 years. I am slightly sorry to spoil it because now you have no good reason to ever watch this show. It really isn't good in like any other measure aside from a pretty decent soundtrack, but if anything, this placement is not to belittle how bad School Days is. We can ignore the bare bones premise and the lack of character consistency and frankly not great mid-2000s animation. This placement is to commemorate a piece of anime history. The fact that a show this overall bad can be lifted up by an ending that's somehow worse is a miracle in any sense of the word. Thank you, School Days. We won't forget you. I'm not entirely sure why, but this show has a weird place in my heart of being one that I always thought needed a second season. I don't know, out of all the shows you could give a second season to that need one, like No Game No Life, Bloom Into You, Nozaki Kun, etc., Batum is the one my mind always immediately rushes back to. I think the thing that sets it apart from those others is that those shows I just mentioned are all really good on their own. But Batum by itself is a story that is both incomplete and doesn't offer the viewer much in terms of satisfaction. There are some bombastic action sequences, pun intended, and the character drama within isn't bad, but without anything to build up to, the show is left in this odd liminal state of making you think, huh, neat, and nothing more. A consistent trend I'm seeing of some of these lower ranked shows is that they don't give the audience much to toy with outside of the base episodes themselves. A show like Sword Art Online, while sharing a similar premise and similar flaws in storytelling to Batum, is much more engaging because there is more of that world to lean into, and the possibilities of exploration and adventure feel limitless. For Batum, I mean, you can only make explosions cool in so many unique ways before the well runs dry. Additionally, this show does what many anime did at the time of trying to be more mature than its counterparts. Usually, what that meant was more blood, more cursing, and more sexual content, oftentimes bordering toward the R word. Like many of those contemporaries, it really makes the show feel more immature in retrospect, because they fell back on tropey versions of maturity rather than dealing with any provocative material in a meaningful way. The whole vibe of the show's general attitude toward women is easily enough to rub some people the wrong way, and with good reason. Overall, Batum is a product of the time it was created in, and had it received a second season, mayhaps it would be more fondly remembered. But I believe that ship has long sailed, and even if a season 2 does come its way, the time when people were asking for this kind of thing is long gone. It's almost poetic that this one season is how Batum will be remembered, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Man, my eyes hurt just thinking about this show. When I first watched K Project, I thought its unique use of color and dynamic lighting was revolutionary, and now I'm wizened enough to see it's just trying to distract you from the rest of the show. Granted, this show does not get as bad as some of Gohan's later works, such as Handshakers, but it's still pretty darn ugly. Now, the concept, that's something worth exploring. The superpower gang wars just seems to be a cool thing to do in your show, whether that series is Durarara or Bakano or K Project. But even though this isn't the most unique idea for a show ever, I do still feel like there is merit in the way that this concept is tackled in K versus other series. Delving into the inner connections of the factions more to make you care more about them rather than putting all the attention toward inter-gang conflict makes the damage done more impactful for the people watching your series. And again, this isn't lightning in a bottle. Other shows and movies have done this, but there was something special about the way K Project handled the topic. By the way, K is a stupid name for a show. Who names their series just one letter? Literally looking up K Project on my anime list won't get you this series, but typing just the letter K is enough to make it appear. Try doing that on Google though, and good luck. I digress. K is another one of those shows that I wish I could flesh out more here, but the only aspects that stick with me are the negative ones. And for the sake of not sounding like a broken record by only harping on all these shows' negative traits, I'll move on. The last thing I'll say about the show is that I distinctly remember it getting worse as it went on longer, especially in the jump from season 1 to season 2. So if you do want to check it out, be warned that what you start with is the best that you're going to get. Not the worst of the worst, but K ends up being just kind of okay. That was terrible. Oh my god. The difference between this and Girls with Panzer is whether you root for Army or you root for Navy. But also, it's if you value your eyesight. Yes, this early 2010 series has bad 3D animation, and that makes it a terrible show. End of segment. Okay, I've never been one to harp too badly on 3D, CGI, and anime because animation is difficult, and not every studio can work with the resources and talent as something like Ufotable or Studio Orange. But it's just the case that the farther back we go, the worst 3D CG looks. I know there are exceptions, I do, but that's exactly what they are. They're exceptions. In Arpeggio, the animation gives every character an uncanny valley feeling where they kind of look like they stare not at each other, but through each other, especially the main submarine girl. Oh yeah, if you didn't get the Girls und Panzer reference from before, it feels pertinent to mention that half the main cast in this series are submarines that have waifu bodies. I will say this does raise stakes, so like when a ship is being attacked, there's a character you directly feel concern for because they experience that damage firsthand and could just straight up die if the ship goes down. Yet that feeling goes both ways because if something impactful does happen between these characters, it's basically like two Toyota Camrys having character development. Again, uncanny valley. Aside from the visuals and that weird ship waifu disconnect, what is there to say? I guess some of the action scenes feel pretty tense, and it's nice that the story got a full conclusion through some movies, so it doesn't end on a terrible cliffhanger. But that feels like a few pretty bare bones compliments overall. Not terrible. I think we've officially moved out of the realm of shows I totally despised watching, but not something worth watching over higher entries on this list. Maybe worth listening to, though. The soundtrack pleasantly surprised me. Otherwise, moving on. Did you guys know that this show still has a pretty avid fan base that insists it needs another season? I figured most people fell off that boat when years went by, or especially once Manglobe went under. But nope, many still advocate that this show got robbed and deserved better. And I can agree with some of that sentiment. Dead Man Wonderland has a kick ass premise that deserves to be explored more. A prison turned theme park that ups its stakes to Hunger Games esque levels just to make life inside its walls bearable for another few moments is a concept that blends a lot of pre existing ideas into a fairly unique feeling hodgepodge that never has one element dominate the others. The tension is rife in this story, and I love when a show can give me stakes that aren't just death. I mean, that's obviously here. It's Dead Man Wonderland, after all. But even the tension of not knowing who to trust and the added layer of mystery from the main character's wrongful imprisonment build into a gripping storyline. That never goes anywhere because, yeah, no season 2. Like Batum, I'm afraid to say that this show falls into a category of series released when the market was chomping at the bit for more mature content in animation. But we have plenty of it now, and this show would probably be lost in a lot of the noise of a seasonal anime schedule if it released today. A couple of shows on this list are going to be in the camp of shows I would go back to if a season 2 came out eventually. Grimgar, No Game No Life, Bakano. But with Dead Man Wonderland, the more I think about it and the more I recognize that it was a decent show, the more I feel that it probably doesn't hold up in today's atmosphere. We've seen so many death game type series, we've seen fucked up prisons, and we've seen stories with dubious morality, and heck, we've even seen series with blood based super abilities. I do want to rate this show higher, but without anything to latch onto, I can't. This is the first show I'm conflicted on its placement, and it won't be the last, but I think this fits. Dead Man Wonderland is basically dead in the water, and it doesn't make sense to rank it highly on the list of shows someone may take as recommendation when they'll just have to be directed to the source material after 12 episodes, which I have heard is good, so maybe check that out instead. Plus, I was not vibing with that soundtrack, and I can't remember much in the way of essential plot points anyway, so maybe the show overall isn't actually that good. Did I just gaslight myself into keeping this show low on the list? Maybe, but low on the list is where it stays. Hey, remember when I said during the Arpeggio of Blue Steel review that I thought we had moved out of the realm of shows I totally despised watching? I kind of left out a big contender for that award, and here it is. How do I explain what's wrong with Shakugan no Shana in a succinct way? I can't, because there's so much to consider there. Basically, this is a certain magical index plus bleach, which as an idea sounds rad, but what the end product becomes is downright inexcusable. So I'll start with the beginning. Our main character is a normal guy who gets caught up in a world of spirit, ghost, demon, something or other hunters, and more specifically with a hunter named Shauna. And Shauna is almost the worst character in the show, but she does get beat out by the main guy later on, so we're really working with gold here in this partnership. The first season or so is mostly like the first arc of Bleach and Index, a combination of the guy trying to maintain his regular daily life while also helping Shauna fight to protect humanity. But then we hit a bit of a hurdle. How do we balance time with all these characters from both worlds while also progressing the story in a significant yet metered and nuanced way? Oh, what's that? We don't do that? Well, that's one option, I guess. By the time season 3 rolls around, every major player in this story, save a few, is just insufferable, doing that obnoxious anime thing of never communicating or thinking about the consequences of their actions to add a fabricated sense of drama to the world. Like, the main guy, the one who started this whole story, basically swaps sides and joins the Spirit Ghost Demons because it was the only way to help his friends, I think? The entire time you watch this unfold, you're thinking, okay, he has to have a really good reason, right? But not really. And yet he just gets his inner conflict resolved and has a happy ending anyway shortly thereafter. I kid you not when I say this third season of Shakugan no Shana was probably the hardest I have ever struggled through the ending of any series before, because nothing made sense, all the motivations were just random asspulls, and the plot really just seemed to want to have a big war go down as its resolution without taking the time to build to that meaningfully. So why is it the 16th lowest and not at the bottom? Well, I can't say it's totally irredeemable. I suppose there are aspects to be found here of a decent show, especially in the first two seasons. And I know that there are probably a lot of people who got more out of season 3 than I did. But it's just so much time sunk into a series that squanders any good faith it had with its audience that I cannot feasibly put it any higher than this. This is the most good faith I can give to Shauna. I even like tsunderes, man. I'm the target demo. So, man, this show really must not be for anyone then. There's nothing sadder than seeing a show with an admittedly unique, solid premise and then just watching it sink lower and lower and lower into mediocrity and then just end up being outright awful. Food Wars is one drawback from being an easy recommendation at the outset, was the literal food porn. But even that was tolerable for a seasoned anime watcher and made the series even more memorable, for better or worse. Then it just kept doing that. Again and again, it just fell into this well of doing the same thing, trying to keep the audience invested by raising the stakes, ultimately culminating in something that was just so far gone from the original spirit of interest this show held that it wasn't worth acknowledging anymore. The first two seasons are fine, but then it just kept doing the same thing over and over, just like how I am right now, harping on this issue over and over. And even this review is starting to get a little dull because of it. Now imagine that for a whole 50 plus episode series. The animation also hit the pits around the season 3 marker. Not that it got worse from a general visual standpoint, but I'll never forget someone pointing out how many of the shots in this series are panning shots that have no need to be panning shots. The show never stops moving the camera, and it honestly feels slightly nauseating once you notice it. Apologies for those of you who are in the middle of watching it, now you'll never be able to unsee it. It's my go-to example of wasted potential, and worst of all, it stopped even focusing on the cooking. People just made meals off screen in 5 seconds and took any kind of value one could have gotten from watching this series from a culinary standpoint and threw it away for forced shonen drama. Alas, at least the first season is still pretty fun. The rest, c'est la vie. It is very likely that there is no significant reason for someone to watch through Elfen Lied in 2024. The show is butt ugly, for one, being both a representative of art styles at the time and a poor iteration on those same art styles. But the main thing Elfen Lied does that should push away most viewers is that it has maybe 5 good scenes in the entire show. And if we're being honest, the opening sequence is the only one really worth a damn. If this first scene was a budding animator's short art project, it would genuinely be pretty amazing. Unfortunately, it gets tacked onto the rest of the show, which is not at all full of the vibes you'd think of it having. I gave it a 5 for vibes here just because there's 2 different shows happening here with decent atmosphere and plots for both, but they're melded together in a very confusing way. If you're here for the gore and horror, get ready for a lot of episodes of the main character acting like a pet in a slice of life mystery. Seriously, we go from the intensity of that opening, that iconic opening, and the tension it builds to, down to the same character acting like a handicapped child in a woman's body, peeing on the floor. The tonal disconnect is just too much to maintain the show's facade as a hardcore thriller, and instead it gets lost in itself. Still, this show is quite notable, if not for its first episode alone, which reminds me of Goblin Slayer's first episode in the way it catches you off guard and makes you feel immediately uneasy about the world you're diving into. That notoriety has kept the show on the minds of thousands of people. Hell, this is the 73rd highest ranked anime ever on my anime list. People see something here, and even if a lot of that is nostalgia blindness, there's something to be said about how so many people shared in Elfen Lied being their first quote-unquote hardcore type of show, with blood and tits and urination. I don't know. I kind of marvel at Elfen Lied for that, even if the show itself isn't worth much on its own. Legacy is a compelling thing, after all. I don't remember who it was, whether it was Giguk or Mother's Basement or even an actual friend of mine, but something that has stuck with me for a while, ever since I watched this series, was someone describing it as a comedy that pretends to be a horror. Another, along with having a terrible title, also has a bland premise that has been done to death in the horror genre, even before this show aired back in the early 2010s. Curse Town, people die, people try to figure out why curse is happening. Hell, if you boil it down like that, it's literally the same plot as Uzumaki, a much better series by one of the greatest minds in the horror space. Another tries to go for shock value and suspense, and while some of these deaths are truly iconic, I'm low-key kind of wary around people with pointed umbrellas now. A lot of them are just funny. If you're going for horror, the worst thing you can do is make your audience laugh in the most suspenseful moments to shatter every ounce of tension you just built up to. The tone just shifts way too much, and people move past traumatic, harrowing incidents as if they're just a typical day with the fellas. It's ultimately baby's first horror anime. I can't say anything is particularly wrong with it, it won't be the worst thing you ever watch, and it's certainly more cohesive plot-wise than something like Corpse Party, but man, watch Shiki, Mononoke, Higurashi, anything else if you're looking for a genuinely well-rounded horror experience. I know Higurashi was ranked lower, but even I, a diehard hater of Higurashi, a hater-rashi, if you will, understand the value and theming of that series as something people latch onto for a reason. This is just, well, I guess that title is pretty spot on after all. It's just another horror show. Maybe someday anime will get this genre right. Foreshadowing. Hear me out. Yes, this is a children's show about Sonic the Goddamn Hedgehog. So I know it seems bad that I'm putting this over some of the most notorious anime that people hold dear, like Higurashi or Ergo Proxy. Counterpoint, though, It's Sonic the Goddamn Hedgehog, and this show fully animates the plot of the best video game ever made, Sonic Adventure 2. Hell yeah, let's go rolling around at the speed. Sorry you had to see that. But really, Sonic X does have some qualities that push it even this high on the list. For the record, I watched the 4Kids dub of this show because that's what I grew up with and what I was nostalgic for when I started watching through the show as an adult a few years ago. For one, the voice actors embody their characters extremely well, and to some degree I still associate a lot of the voices in the show with those of the actual Sonic characters. The music, while cheesy, fits decently well and would easily get any viewer of any age hyped up for the action scenes on display here. The animation is static, but not bad per se, and I do think that there is credit to be given to a series that builds upon existing material in a unique enough way, while also being able to pander to fans with callbacks, references, music, and iconic moments. Also, a lot of these shows on this list are shows made for kids in general, so relegating Sonic X to the bottom over that specific definition would feel unfair, even if this target age group is younger than average. But this won't be the last time a show like this makes it on this list. I mean, you can expect to see Pokemon ranked somewhere higher up than here. Yet, this is still a fairly low ranking for good reason. My nostalgia bias for Sonic Adventure 2 can only carry a show so far, especially when that plotline only makes up like 10 episodes of the series. I know I just praised it briefly before, but the music is way over the top, way too bombastic for much of the low-level stakes that this children's show entails. Also, it's like the same 5 songs for every situation. If I have to hear this one more time, I'm going to lose it. The pacing from episode to episode feels like whiplash because if you're in a game-based plotline, like the adventure storylines, things move rapid fire to condense all of that. But if you're in what are essentially filler episodes, it may be some of the most boring TV you ever watch. The main issue with children's TV isn't that it's inherently bad, it's that it repeats a successful formula so many times that it gets ground into the dirt and the entertainment value rapidly dissipates for anyone with an attention span greater than that of a 5-year-old. So it's a mixed bag. That's why it's one of the shows ranked perfectly average on this rating scale. Now, I gotta wrap this up because this particular review is getting a little long and I got 18 more of these videos to do in the next 11 months. So I guess you could say I gotta go fast.